Hey there, focus learners, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something that's honestly fascinated humanity for centuries. We're looking at a huge mystery, how our emotions and our physical health are just deeply, inextricably connected. We're going to trace the incredible evolution of how we understand the human body, starting all the way back at ancient temples and taking it right up to today's cutting-edge neuroscience. Okay, let's dive right into this. Can a depressing thought actually cause physical disease? I mean, think about your own life for a second. Have you ever come down with a nasty cold right after a tremendously stressful week at work? It happens all the time, right? Well, for a long stretch of modern history, doctors would have told you those two things were absolutely not connected. Diseases were seen as these concrete, physical things you could measure. Emotions, they were fleeting, invisible, you couldn't quantify them. But as we're about to see, this strict separation of mind and body is actually a pretty recent invention in human history.
Section 1. The Ancient Balance, when mind and body were one.
So for thousands of years, the fundamental belief was that human health was just this seamless, interconnected balance of both physical and emotional states. They were never treated as separate systems. Imagine being on the sun-drenched coast of Crete over 2,000 years ago. The ancient Greeks built these magnificent healing temples dedicated to Asclepius, the god of healing. It was honestly a lot like a modern holistic retreat. If you were sick, priests didn't just hand you a physical remedy. They healed people using a mix of a healthy diet and pure spring water, but they paired it with soothing activities meant to calm the mind, things like sleep, music, and prayer. They just intuitively knew that to heal the physical body, you absolutely had to tend to the emotions. And this ancient idea of balance eventually became the foundation of early medicine. For centuries, doctors relied heavily on the humoral theory. They believed your health depended entirely on balancing four visible physical fluids, or humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. But what's really crucial here is that these physical fluids were directly equated with personality and emotional states. Like, having an excess of blood didn't just make you physically rosy, it made you emotionally sanguine or super confident. An excess of black bile, that made you emotionally melancholic. The physical fluid and the emotional feeling weren't separate things. To them, they were exactly the same thing.
Section 2. The Great Divide, the Search for Visible Proof. But then, things changed. As the hard sciences began to really take off, our obsession with undeniable proof actually started to tear the mind and the body apart. Back in the 17th century, the philosopher René Descartes came along and neatly divided the world into two distinct realms. On one side, you had the rational, provable realm of the physical body. On the other, the irrational, unprovable realm of emotions. Under the new rules of emerging modern science, it was simple. If you can't measure it, it isn't real. So invisible emotions were basically dumped on the realm of magic, or the unprovable, completely cut off from physical health. To really picture this shift, imagine sneaking into a clandestine, underground anatomical dissecting theater at the University of Padua in the 16th century. Renegade anatomists were literally risking the wrath of the authorities to secretly dissect human corpses. They even had a trapdoor beneath the table, so if guards showed up, they could just slip the body into the river below. Now, this quest for visible proof totally revolutionized medicine because it showed us the exact physical abnormalities that cause disease. But it inadvertently created a massive blind spot that lasted for centuries. Because emotions couldn't be physically seen on a wooden dissecting table, medical science essentially decided to ignore them. So as medicine marched on, we went from these vague, almost guessed-at ideas about the brain to creating highly precise anatomical maps. Doctors meticulously charted out the nerve trunks. But here's the catch. They were completely baffled by how it all functioned. Because they couldn't physically see how a lump of gray tissue produced a thought or a feeling, they just assumed that any illness without a visible anatomical cause wasn't a real disease. If someone had a severe emotional illness, doctors just dismissed it as a mere functional neurosis, which is really just a fancy way of saying it's all in your head.
Section 3. Mapping the brain, seeing the invisible. So, how did we finally break out of this centuries-long scientific blind spot? Well, surprisingly enough, the biological breakthrough came from the Industrial Revolution. The textile industry had just invented these vibrant chemical dyes for coloring silk and velvet. And histologists like Rudolf Virchow had this brilliant realization. They could soak brain tissue in these exact same dyes. Suddenly, the invisible became visible. These dyes lit up the microscopic wire-like structures of nerve cells and their complex pathways. For the very first time, we could actually see the massive interconnected tangle of wires that transmit signals all across the brain. Fast forward to the 1930s. A pioneering neurosurgeon named Wilder Penfield was working in Montreal, and he began mapping the living brain. He did this by stimulating awake patients' brains with tiny electrical currents and simply asking them what they felt.
Through this, he discovered what's known as the homunculus. It's basically a distorted, literal map of the human body charted right across the surface of the brain. He proved exactly how our physical senses, your thumbs, your lips, your tongue, are physically and electrically wired directly into our minds.
But that still leaves a huge question. How do those physical senses trigger invisible emotions? Well, think about this beautiful thought from the author Marcel Proust. After tasting a tea-soaked cake, he wrote, "An exquisite pleasure had invaded my senses, with no suggestion of its origin." I love that because it beautifully captures a neurological concept we now understand as fact. Sensory inputs, like a taste or a specific smell, trigger electrical impulses, and those impulses release chemical messengers called neurotransmitters that travel directly to the memory and emotion centers of our brain. So the physical chemistry of our senses literally creates the profound feeling of an emotion.
Section 4. The microscopic world. The germ distraction.
Now, just as neuroscience was making all these incredible connections, another massive discovery happened that threw things off track again. The invention of the microscope revealed this dirty soup of invisible external invaders: streptococci, bacilli, viruses, fungi, dust mites. This was obviously a total game changer for treating infections. But the problem was, science became so overwhelmingly obsessed with fighting off these external bugs that they pretty much forgot about the body's internal emotional balance again. Medicine became entirely focused on the outside world and completely ignored the world within.
Section 5. Mind and body reunited, the synthesis.
But eventually the pendulum of science just had to swing back. Over the centuries, our tools evolved drastically, from the naked eye to early microscopes to box cameras. And today, in the modern era, we have MRI and PET scanners. These are essentially incredibly powerful 3D cameras that let us peer deep inside the living body. We're no longer stuck mapping static, dead tissue. We can actually watch a live feed of the human brain processing emotions in real time. We can watch molecules light up like little beacons exactly as a person is feeling fear or joy or sadness. And through this modern imaging and biochemistry, we have finally found the undeniable biological link. It turns out that our emotions and our immune system are communicating using the exact same molecular language. The chemical messengers triggered by our feelings are quite literally talking to the immune cells that fight off disease. They use the exact same chemical pathways. So, as it turns out, those ancient priests back at the Asclepion, they hit the nail on the head all along. The mind and the body are fundamentally chemically connected.
Which brings us to a pretty incredible realization. We now have irrefutable scientific proof that the functions of our mind actively influence the physical health of our body. So, I'm going to leave you with one final thought to chew on. If our emotions possess the biological power to make us sick, how can we intentionally use them to help us heal? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.